Morning. Welcome to Thinking is Contagious. Talk a little bit about the economics today, and I'm going to interject a little philosophy into it. Uh, I'm going to hopefully make my philosophy professor, Miguel Arechavaleta, proud with some of my thoughts here, interject some Aristotle into it. But I've done a lot of thinking about what's going on in the country. This the haves and the have-nots, the poor and the rich, the redistribution of wealth, and what's going on. And I think a lot of it has to do with the choices, the direction, and that that upper 1% or half a percent, or the elite, or the people who control um, 80%, 40% of the wealth. I think the last statistic I saw was something around the top 1% uh, of the population controls 40% of the United States, controls 40% of the wealth. So it's a staggering amount. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Aristotle and the middle class, the importance of the middle class, what he said in his writings, his thesis or theory, politics. He says, if the middle class disappears, the poor become the majority. And poor, the poor, he says, tend to be less educated and struggle. Their focus is really survival, making ends meet. Every day, that's the aim, and that's what they're focused on. And taking that on its word, I look at it as, and this is me now thinking, it really opens the door for those who don't have to worry about those types of things, to worry about how to gather even more wealth. So it gives the rich the opportunity. Um, Conversely, if the poor were to become a majority in a democracy, um, then they would control the vote, and they could, in theory, control the wealth. And I think that that's why, in a lot of ways, the founding fathers, uh, they were trying to avoid mob rule, but I think they were also trying to keep control. As the founding fathers, they were the elite of that society at the time, um, to make sure that they kept some control. So I think that some of that was a component in their decision to become a democratic republic as opposed to a pure democracy. Um, the solution, you would think, for the rich to avoid the poor from becoming this majority would be to help grow the middle class. Because the middle class, as per Aristotle, and if you look at it logically, they're this buffer. They're this buffer between the rich and the poor. Um, in politics, Aristotle, in his writing Politics, Aristotle says that the best constitution is controlled by a numerous middle class, which stands between the rich and the poor. For those who possess the goods of fortune in moderation find it easiest to obey the rules of reason. They are accordingly less apt than the rich or poor to act unjustly towards their fellow citizens. So this middle class is critically important in Aristotle's thinking to keep um, reality between the overly opulent and the poor. Um, the the very fact, if you consider this premise to be true, it would lead you to the point that you would say, like I was stating before, the aim of the rich should be to keep that middle class vibrant and abundant in order to create this buffer and allow for society for people to live and flourish and hopefully elevate as many people from the poor category to the middle class category. However, now this is where I interject my thought. I think that what happens is that the greed factor comes into effect. And with the ability, like we said before, to focus on wealth creation as opposed to survival, the upper crust has that ability. I think they realize, and of a famous person, and I don't know who to attribute this to. But I've read it at several places. They asked him, what would happen if you distributed all the wealth in the world equally among all the people on the earth? And that person's response was that in a very short period of time, it would all be back in the hands of the people who know how to create wealth. And I think that is what is driving this divide between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots in this country, is that the rich have decided, that upper 1% has decided, you know what, we would rather at this point get more money in the hands of the poor because it's easier for that money then eventually to end up back in our hands than it is to solve the problems of society by helping create a stronger middle class. On the opposite, what they're trying to do is say, let's destroy the middle class. Let's take the money of the middle class, who has somewhat more ability to combat us, to put reins on us, and let's get their money. And instead of having to work so hard to get it from them, let's give it to the poor, who are less educated, less sophisticated in most parts. I mean, I'm not using a broad brush, but in theory. Let's get it in their hands, and then it makes it much easier for it to end up back in the hands of the rich. And I think that that's where this imbalance is occurring in this country, and that's why you're seeing the erosion of the middle class. And the erosion of the middle class is being undertaken by that top 1% or 0.5% or 1/4% or the elite or whatever you want to call them. The vehicle that they're using to get the money from the middle class redistributed to the poor, where it's easily within their reach, is this liberal left-wing agenda, feigning as if there is concern for minorities and the poor. There is none. The history of the Democratic Party proves there is none. And they're using this liberal component of society to convince them that what they're trying to do is help the poor people. What they're trying to really do is eliminate the middle class, take the middle class money, put it in the hands of the poor, like I said, and then they can easily swoop in and take the money for themselves. That's why you see people say, oh, I don't understand all these billionaires and they're so liberal. Of course they're liberal. Of course they're liberal. Because their aim is to become zillionaires. It's not trillionaires. They're billionaires, they were trillionaires, they're zillionaires. And it's a lot easier to get the money from the path of least resistance. Aristotle goes on to say, and I'm going to play this into the anarchy that we're seeing on the streets, how the poor are being used as pawns of the rich through looting, pillaging, burning, violence, to create this havoc and to undermine society. And Aristotle says the middle class is the most easily obeys reason, laws. Those who are excessively beautiful, strong, well-born, wealthy, find it hard to follow reason because they tend to be insolent and wicked in great things. In contrast, the poor are, and he uses the term, and I understand today some people get offended by it, but you got to realize this is 2,400 years ago. The poor are extremely wretched and weak and have an exceeding lack of honor, tend to become villains, and too much involved in petty wickedness. I think it's a little out there, the way it's worded, and I think it was an era where there was no political correctness, and I think there was more lawlessness and more the poor. It was a different status. Today, the poor is much more educated. They have more things than the poor did 2,400 years ago. So, in a way, it's not 100% correct, but in theory, the theory is that the poor many times not, and you can't judge it unless you're there. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do to survive. So that's some of the thought behind it. But what I'm trying to drive at is that in Aristotle's piece Politics, there's 6 main points, and they all play into what's happening today. The middle class obeys reason. That's point number 1. The middle class is best suited to rule and to be ruled. The more follow the rules. The middle class enjoys the safest and most stable lives. A large middle class keeps a regimen stable, and a large middle class makes it harder to separate people by categories. Finally, the best legislators come from the middle class. There's a couple of key points there that I think that play into what's happening today. The middle class enjoys the safest and most stable lives. Safety is a big concern today. The erosion of the middle class ties in hand with the erosion of safety in this country. A large middle class makes it hard to segregate people. The erosion of the middle class allows for more segregation among classes, more dissension in society. And the middle class is best suited to rule and to be ruled. The middle class obeys reason. Okay? Another reason why it's important, if you want revolution, and make no mistake about it, the revolution that's aimed for in this country is a Marxist socialist revolution. So if you want revolution, the elimination of the middle class is very important. The stability of the middle class needs to be taken away. This, I think, is pretty deep, what we've talked about today. And I think if you sit back and analyze it, I think it's pretty much irrefutable that the underpinnings of what is being done to our society today, the vehicle is the elimination of the middle class. It is being spearheaded by the people who control a vast majority of the wealth, the means of production, want to control more. The hunger for the control is insatiable. And the path of least resistance is to get what the middle class has, take it from them, and place it in the hands of the poor, of the less sophisticated and the financially sophisticated, of the, in many cases, somewhat, some less educated, that not necessarily always being the most overriding factor. That there are many educated poor people. has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with education. Get it into their hands, and that makes the pillaging by the rich that much easier. So I've gone off a little bit on the tangent of the political basis, but I think it's something that it's important to talk about, and I think it's important for us to understand, and I would like some feedback as to how you view it. But I think that we need to fight to keep the middle class in place, because it is what will keep this country from sinking into the abyss. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy it. I would love to have comments. Please share this. Please subscribe. And I'm really looking forward to see who becomes the 100th subscriber here. We're at the infancy of this channel. It's going to be big. I really believe it. I say that with all modesty, because I think that the effort is being put in to make this work, and where you do make the effort and where you do work hard, good things will happen. Thanks for your support. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for subscribing, and thank you for sharing.